Hello everybody, welcome to Fortitude Immigration subscription on YouTube. Please subscribe, then you can stay informed to all my wonderful updates and information. So today we're just going to brief on some information related to COVID-19 updates, as I get a lot of questions related to that. So first of all, let's talk about the express entry invitation to apply intake. I get a lot of questions, is permanent residency still an option in Canada? And yes, it still is. The options are still there. Each province, of course, is still responsible for their own programs, and due to COVID-19, some of those programs obviously might change. The occupation and demands might also change, and so you need to constantly be keeping an eye on the province of your choice. If that's Ontario, for example, what maybe their occupation and demands might have now been decreased. For Saskatchewan, for instance, their occupation exemption list might have grown based on the COVID-19 and the unemployment rate in Canada obviously being extremely high, like in the millions. So obviously you need to keep abreast of all of that information. Now, with respect to express entry, yes, they are still doing draws, but most of those draws, unfortunately, right now are for in-Canada programs, which is Canadian Experience Class, provincial nomination programs, where the applicant is already in Canada. Because it's just easier to offer permanent residency right now to people already here, already following the COVID-19 regulations and quarantine acts and all of that good stuff. In the near future, will they be opening it up to the federal skilled program and the federally skilled trade program? Definitely. But we have to go just day by day based on the IRCC information that they provide. Now, saying that, let's talk a little bit about the travel restriction exemptions. So we get a lot of questions based on that. So let's talk about the recent update that just took effect today, the IEC participants outside of Canada. IEC stands for International Experience Canada participants, which is those who are coming for an international experience, or used to be called a holiday visa. It's an open permit, and each country designates how many allotment they will allow, and there's based on certain criteria. So participants in the working holiday, young professionals, or international co-op categories. In order to come to Canada, and you are part of the Travel Ban Exemptions, you must have a valid job offer and a port of entry letter of introduction. Now, due to COVID-19, a lot of job offers are no longer valid due to businesses closing or having limited staff. So in order for you to still come to Canada based on that criteria, so you must have a valid job offer, so you need to be in contact with the employer who originally offered that to you, and a port of entry letter of introduction. Now, for those, for example, who are part of the working holiday visa, you wouldn't obviously have a job offer to come necessarily. But in order to come into Canada now, you must show that you're coming for essential purposes and not for non-optional purposes, which means that you cannot be coming here just to visit. You must have valid proof you're coming here for a reason, which would be a job offer. So unfortunately, anybody who is granted that to come to Canada prior to COVID-19 no longer can come unless you can prove a reason to come into Canada, which would be a job. Now, people who are already here at an IEC in Canada, there are ways potentially to extend your status, but again, it just depends on the circumstances that you're in. Now, while you're in Canada, you must always maintain your status. So if you cannot extend your IEC work permit while in Canada and it's expiring soon, and you cannot leave Canada due to flights or restrictions to exit, you must then apply for a visitor status in order to maintain your status in Canada. Now, I could go on for a long time talking about the IEC program, but I just wanted to give you some updates based on that. You can always contact me later on for more information. Now, while we're talking about entering Canada, there's also other work-related programs like the Postgraduate Work Permit program, where I get a lot of questions, can I enter Canada? Prior to COVID-19, yes, you could totally enter Canada because it's an open work permit and you did not need to already have a job offer in order to enter. But in order to be part of the travel ban restriction exemptions, now to enter Canada, you must have a valid job offer or reasons to enter that are for essential purposes and non-disciplinary or non-optional. So that means that under a postgraduate work permit, you must have a job offer and a port of entry letter of introduction in order to enter Canada. Now, if you were here studying, got a postgraduate work permit application granted, and you left Canada to visit, the pandemic obviously hit and you have a life already established here in Canada, you have an apartment, you have friends here and family, and you've already established your life, that's different. Then you would need to be able to prove all of that upon entry into Canada. So postgraduate work permits are allowed as part of the restriction exemptions, but you must be able to provide reasons to enter Canada that are not for visitor related purposes. And same with anybody who has been granted a study permit to enter Canada. The same thing obviously would take effect. You cannot enter Canada without having a reason. So even though you're part of the travel exemption, you still then must show that you're having a reason to enter Canada. Now, most institutions, educational institutions, are doing online studies, and by saying that, you would not therefore need to enter Canada in order to fulfill your study as an international student requirements. So you could do most of your studying online and therefore have no reason to enter Canada. And online courses won't affect your postgraduate work permit eligibility. So that's something that you guys want to be very clear on. If you have to study from outside of Canada, but you're enrolled in an in-Canada program, you can begin your classes while outside of Canada and complete up to 50% of your program while outside of Canada, and that would still constitute towards your postgraduate work permit program once things start to change and you can enter Canada. Another thing to factor in is students who are here already in Canada. Normally you're not allowed to work outside of your 20 hours unless you are on a break, let's say your Christmas time, your spring break, those kind of things. But right now the government has implemented a change to that, and if you are going to be working in essential services, you are now allowed to work more than your 20 hours if you are on a study permit in an academic session and are eligible to work off campus and are providing essential services. Now, essential services is a very long list, and so you must make sure you are part of one of those occupations on that list in order to be able to work more than 20 hours while working on a study permit without a work permit. Now, this is an exemption due to COVID-19 and not normally the standard. Normally, if you're on a study permit and you wish to work, you would then need a work permit outside of your study permit. Now, the list is very extensive. It has to do with energy and utilities, information and communication technologies, finance, health, food, water, transportation, safety, government, and manufacturing. So you'll need to make sure that your employer is in a service that's considered essential based on that list before you start working more than 20 hours while working on your study permit. Temporary foreign workers, of course, if you have an LMIA or LMIA exemption, you are allowed to come to Canada, but again, the same rules apply. You must be able to prove you have a valid job offer upon entering into Canada, and that due to COVID-19 and so many businesses obviously closing and that offer is no longer valid, then you would not be allowed to enter Canada. So again, if you're on an intra-company transfer, you're coming on an LMIA, anything related to working in Canada, again, you must have a valid job offer and a port of entry introduction letter to come into Canada. Now, saying all of that, you must have a plan to quarantine upon entering into Canada, which is a written plan that you will self-isolate for 14 days upon arriving in Canada. That plan will then detail who's picking you up from the airport, where you're going to be staying, who are you going to be staying with, how are you obtaining food for those 14 days, medical services, medications, etc. It needs to be a detailed written plan, and you must abide by that quarantine. If you don't, the repercussions can be a fine up to $750,000, 6 months of jail time, and or inadmissible, removed from Canada, and banned for entering for at least 1 year. So you must be able to provide a very detailed quarantine plan upon entering into Canada. Now, essential workers are exempt a lot of times from that. For example, if you're a truck driver who's normally crossing borders, there are some exemptions to that, but majority of them there are not. If you're coming over to work, an employer, and it's an LMIA driven work permit or an intracompany transfer work permit, the employer will then assist you with that quarantine plan, and also has been given financial support from the federal government in order for them to maintain that quarantine for 14 days. And they will be checked on, and you will be checked on to make sure you've complied with the Quarantine Act. And the fines are substantial. You also will not be allowed to fly if you have any symptoms related to COVID-19. So again, make sure that you are planning accordingly before you make any hasty decisions to come to Canada, and make sure you are truly part of the travel restrictions and exemption. Another one to factor in is family members who can come to Canada as family members. Now, if you've been granted permanent residency to come to Canada prior to March 18th and you haven't landed yet, you have a COPR and a visa, and are now worried that due to travel restrictions in your home country and not being able to get an international flight, you might lose your COPR and visa status. That's not true. You can then make a request through IRCC web form and let them know that you will not be able to travel before the visa expiry, and then they will give you instructions on what you can do next, because there are plans in place due to all of that, which again are obviously changing. Again, there are intermediate family members are also allowed to come to Canada due to the travel ban exemptions. And intermediate family members are identified as spouses or common law partner, dependent children of dependent children, parents or step parents, and guardian or tutors. So there are a list of people who can participate in coming to Canada, and they can apply for a visitor visa, and you need to mention it's due to COVID-19 and who they are coming to Canada to see, and that it's not coming to Canada to visit. They're coming here for a long-term purpose, to be with a family member, and the reason why. So again, even though there are exemptions to the travel restrictions, you still must have a reason to come, and it's not just to come visit and travel and see Canada during a pandemic. If you guys have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me through Fortitude Immigration Consulting Facebook page. My WhatsApp is always another means of communication, through comments, and on my website, Fortitude Immigration Consulting, as well as another way to reach out to me. There's a way to automatically click on the chat button. It takes you to the WhatsApp. If anybody has any more questions or wants to have more information or more tutorials, please let me know what your questions might be, and I can also bring them up in another tutorial. Thank you.